This is Criteria.
Hey everyone, welcome back to Criteria. I'm Thomas Miras, and I'm here with my friend James Mayevsky.
Hello, everyone.
And we're here for a shorter episode because it's the birthday of Pope St. John Paul the Great today, and we thought we would discuss one of a number of movies that's been made about him. This one is probably the most well-known in the United States. It's just titled John Paul II, and it came out only a few months after he died. He died in April 2nd, 2005, and this came out originally in Vatican City in November, and then aired as a 2-night miniseries on CBS here in the United States. So this is the one starring John Voight and Cary Elwes. John Voight playing the older John Paul II, and Cary Elwes playing the young John Paul II prior to his election as Pope. This is the first film I've seen about John Paul II. Can you say the same? Or?
Yeah, I think so. I remember that we did like a course on him in high school. And that was where I got most of my biographical information about him prior to seeing this film.
Right.
But I think that that's probably the great strength of this film, is that I think for many people, this is going to be the introduction to St. John Paul II's life.
Sure, yeah. I think this is also the first saint movie we've discussed. There are a couple on the Vatican film list, but we haven't gotten to those yet. We did do a little review of Fatima, and
right.
that has a couple of saints in it,
right.
But it's as much about the
apparition. I
apparition.
didn't think about that getting into this, that by choosing to talk about this film, this is the first time we will be talking about a saint movie.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's certainly the first biopic
right
thing that we've discussed as well.
Right. Which there's some of those on the Vatican film list too that don't involve saints.
Right.
Like Gandhi.
James, we're going to have to do one of the ones that we don't want to discuss soon. Oh, no. I don't want to put all of them off to the very end. I think that after, in the next couple ones, we should pick one that we haven't been looking forward to.
So what are
watching.
the top films on the Vatican film list that we're not excited about talking about?
To be fair, we haven't seen these.
Yes.
But I would say Gandhi. I hear that Francesco is really bad.
Yeah.
But we'll probably discuss that in conjunction with the other movie about St. Francis.
This might upset some of our viewers, but I'm not very excited about watching Chariots of Fire.
Why?
I don't know.
Have you seen it?
No, I haven't seen it. I don't really know anything about it. All I know is dun 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 dun.
So why does that turn you against it?
I don't know. I just it doesn't seem particularly appealing to me.
All right, fair enough. But I'm sure I'll enjoy it. So I don't know what else. Anything else? I think Gandhi is the biggest one. I definitely, people say Francesco is bad. That's the one with Mickey Rourke playing St. Francis of Assisi. And I only know him from the second Iron Man, being the villain in the second Iron Man.
Why do you think that
movie.
That's on the list? You think just because it's St. Francis of Assisi?
I don't know, because there's already two Francis of Assisi movies on the list. The first is The Flowers of St. Francis by Rossellini. So,
and that's great.
Yeah.
That's a great film.
So you've seen that?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. I'd have to have the list in front of me, but I think Gandhi is definitely, and it may be a perfectly fine movie, but I never watch Oscar bait historical civil rights movies. That's just not a type of movie I ever watch, So I'm sure it'll have its good points. I'm sure Ben Kingsley does a fine job in his performance as Gandhi, but I'm also, regardless of the quality of the movie, I'm also certain in advance that it doesn't deserve to be on the Vatican film list. Because why would it? You only have 45 films and you're putting Gandhi with Ben Kingsley?
Yeah.
Just because Gandhi is an inspiring figure or something? I don't know.
Well, so, we're really going to have to watch one of these films now that we've talked about this.
And it doesn't even have to be one of the ones we think we're not going to like. It could just be one of the ones that like we aren't in a hurry to talk about.
Sure.
I just think we shouldn't put them all off towards the very end.
That's right.
Because otherwise we'll just be doing more and more non-Vatican film list in between.
Yes. But something that we have been putting off for a little while is doing one of these saint films.
Yeah.
So there's Saint Therese, there's Saint Joan of Arc, there's The Flowers of Saint Francis. These are a lot of great saint films that we could be tackling this subject with.
Yeah.
Instead, I hadn't really thought about it, but here we are talking about this film about Pope St. John Paul II.
And that's just because it's his birthday, and I just wanted to check out one of the films about him. Got some good grooves in the background here coming from the street. There's been a bunch of biopics and other kinds of movies about him, some in Polish, a couple of different ones in English. And this is also notable just because of the kind of like the quality of the star power brought in.
That's
so
true.
We've got, as I mentioned, Cary Elwes, we've got John Voight, we've got Christopher Lee playing what's the cardinal's name?
I don't know his name. He's
blanking.
Christopher Lee, the Polish archbishop.
Basically John Paul II's mentor in Poland. I'm totally blanking on his name now. That's too bad. So it's quite interesting. And we also have some real figures from Polish history and John Paul II's life in the film.
Pretty cool.
Mainly, what's the guy's name?
Why do you keep asking me? You're the one bringing it up.
I'm not good at remembering all these Polish names. Lech Walesa. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right now. The leader of the Solidarity movement.
And he plays himself.
In this film, which is interesting.
That's probably one of the coolest parts of the film, I think.
Yeah, that's quite interesting.
It turns out that he's not that bad of an actor.
Yeah,
and actually,
I would say so.
He has these some really tender moments with John Voight in the film that are made all the more kind of impressive because you're looking at the actual guy who had this encounter with Pope St. John Paul II, and it's almost like you're seeing him not just performing this or acting this, but also remembering it. Seldom do you really see this act of remembering captured on screen, and I think that's kind of compelling.
That's quite interesting. By the way, he is not the only like artist or actor, I feel like. Well, I guess he was mainly not an actor, but to become president of Poland at some point.
Oh yeah,
there's been a couple. I can't think of any of the others off the top of my head, but I've definitely, when like looking at some of the credits for some of these Decalogue movies we've been discussing, at least one of the people in that like later became a politician. Or something.
Really?
And of course, Pisowicz, who wrote Decalogue, also became a politician.
There's something about that. I think
John Paul II, of course, himself being an actor.
Right. And Reagan being this great partner of his in the effort against communism, also being an actor.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting.
Right now in the news, Matthew McConaughey is supposedly making some phone calls about a potential run for governor in Texas.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
That's the first I heard about that.
Yeah. But it is this kind of interesting phenomenon of actors taking on this leadership role. I think that there is actually something that's kind of constitutive in the calling of an actor to be representative, I think that there is a kind of kingship that the actor takes on just by virtue of getting up in front of everyone and pointing to something,
Interesting.
And I think that that's also why, incidentally, whenever it comes time to like push propaganda, we start carting out the actors and the celebrities to start, singing Imagine on YouTube or whatever,
Right.
Yeah.
So the first John Paul II's time as an actor definitely plays an important role in his in the first half of this film. So basically the first half goes up to his election as Pope, and it covers his young life in Poland and the struggles with the Nazis and the communists. We don't really see him acting much. There's really only one scene, I think,
at
the very beginning where we see him acting. We don't hear about his different plays much. So it really, the focus is less on like art for art's sake and more on the role that acting played in his cultural resistance against the Nazis.
Which is cool because, I think that this is kind of a perennial question about the role that culture plays in politics, in how efficacious it is as a vehicle for cultural change. I think that oftentimes people are inclined to poo-poo, efforts at the fine arts as a way of reaching people, as a way of evangelization, as a way of cultural shift. And certainly that drama is played out in this film. But it's kind of ennobling and inspiring to see a young St. John Paul II really advocating for this as not just a legitimate way, but a privileged means actually of reaching hearts, of keeping culture alive.
And it's not just in the abstract art as cultural change or changing people's ideas. It's very specific because because this is the Nazis have decided to suppress Polish culture.
Yeah.
So it is specifically about keeping Polish culture alive as well.
Right.
You could say if it was just a guy saying, well, I don't want to be part of the resistance, I'm just going to make plays. You could see criticizing that, but that the Nazis are very deliberately making this part of their war against the Polish people.
Right.
The justification for focusing on that is very clear.
And I think that that's totally relevant to today, because I think that so much of the kind of cultural revolution that's taking place is it's a battle that's being waged in the cultural arena, in the space of the arts, of, whether it's film or literature, even music for that matter.
Yeah.
So worth thinking about.
Yeah. So one interesting thing about this first half is, and it certainly relates to things in the second half, is his resistance to the idea of fighting back using violence. Mm-hmm. Maybe it's just in certain scenarios. I couldn't tell if it was just sort of across the board. He didn't think this was the way to go. I wasn't sure how I felt about it, but I don't know enough about his early life and kind of the stance he took on that to be sure that it's not accurate. Mm-hmm. There's definitely at least one scene where he's reproaching his friend for killing two Nazi officers or German officers, whatever they are. And I'm thinking, well, this is an invading army. Just because it's not a battle doesn't mean it's not.
Right.
But yeah, I guess you could debate that particular scenario. But
I don't know anything about the particulars of Pope St. John Paul II's, I guess young Karol Wojtyla's ideas about resistance. But I thought that scene in particular was one of the most moving and effective when he is reproaching his friend, because Cary Elwes gets all worked up, and it's not a kind of, it's not a weak pacifism. It's not like a kind of cheap appeal to love your brother. It is a very forceful rebuke, mm-hmm. and that you get a sense of the real power and the courage behind nonviolence as a means of resistance, authentic resistance.
Sure.
I think that part of the problem in the film, that the character of this young John Paul II, part of the problem for him is that this was seemingly unnecessary. They didn't need to kill these guys. This is just a opportunity to take out two people. Sure. There's a kind of callousness to it.
So one thing that often happens in adaptations of literature, in film, in biopics, sometimes in historical movies in general, is the danger of just having something feel like a kind of a succession of scenes.
Yeah, sure.
And this film has to cover a lot of ground. And I think that in parts of the first half, it does kind of feel like kind of a detached succession of scenes.
I mean, the second half too, for that matter. We cross sections of years just to hit these kind of momentous.
Yeah, there are moments like that. Yeah. For sure. So I don't know. Do you have anything in particular you want to comment on with regard to the events of the first half of the film?
Well, I'll note that we talked about this briefly when we did Andrei Rublev and this sort of problem of the biopic of how to capture a life in film, and how Tarkovsky in Andrei Rublev does a very singular job at that. You know, he goes a very different route, whereas this is a much more conventional approach to this kind of episodic, sequencing of events. And in fact, it's almost like the rubric that they used for selecting like which events to show is like the photographs that exist of St. John Paul II. It's almost like stringing together
not for the whole thing, but there's definitely parts where like it'll when he goes camping with his friends in the mountains, and there's some famous photographs of that. You see the moments when those photographs are taken in the film, and there's something like that in the second half at one point as well.
Right.
The film begins with the assassination or attempt on John Paul II as a prologue, and it's the film does take good advantage of the very many moments of high drama in his life. This is a man who lived in very dramatic circumstances.
Yeah.
And it kind of focuses on, I would say, more than his teaching, or even his administration of the church, on him as a world figure, as a figure who is dealing especially with the conflict with communism in Poland, but also other things, and his travels and things like that. There's like little touches on, we get a little bit of theology of the body. We get references to a few of his encyclicals. We get a little bit of his letter to women. There's just a few, there's quotes sprinkled in there.
And I appreciated that, because I think that any treatment of this saint on film is going to be deficient if it doesn't acknowledge, how much of an intellectual powerhouse he was and how consequential he was as a theologian in his own right, So I appreciated that we even got little subtitles with the name of the encyclical that's being quoted that he's working on, And that is just one example of what I think was, largely demonstrated, which is a real knowledge of the source material. There was a real closeness to, not just the events of his life, but also the significance of his papacy, and little details, the kinds of details that would otherwise be annoying, when you watch a film about the church, where it's like, oh, well, I know that that's not how the sacrament is administered in this circumstance, or something like that. Like one example that I can think of from this film is during his ordination, when they are singing the litany of the saints. What I understand of the ordination rite is that's not precisely when the laying on of hands takes place, but you understand that is being conflated in that moment just for the sake of, the picture and getting through this quickly. There's like an abbreviation, but you understand that because of the attention to detail everywhere else. Right. So it's not a sloppy job is what I'm trying to say. Yeah. Nothing really rang false so much as like maybe a little outdated. And what I mean is that we get so many pictures of the Curia or of church leadership, being really concerned about souls.
Oh yeah, I was going to bring this up. Okay. What would this movie look like? What should a movie look like about John Paul II made today?
Yeah.
Can we put a pin in that and come?
No.
Back
Let's do it. Because we already mentioned that the film is made just months after his death, right? Yeah. So if the inclination if the tendency is already going to be toward a kind of hagiography, then that to me seems only all the more so when you're making the film right after the guy has died, right? Yeah. Now, listen, I have no criticisms to make of Pope St. John Paul II. Mm-hmm. He's the patron of this podcast, and we're doing this episode in honor of him. So I'm I'm not coming at this with any chip on my shoulder, except for like church leadership right now, right? That's what I'm that's what I'm saying, is that it was like watching this film, I saw like a picture of an innocent time when I used to think that my church leaders were looking out for me and that they had the good of my soul at heart, and now it's so hard for me to watch a film that represents, the Vatican as like these men who are holy and who are like agents for, holding back the forces of evil and caring for their flock, call me a little disgruntled, but I think that a film made about him nowadays would look different because, I think that there's been a lot of reason for,
I think that a secular film or a somewhat secular production about him would probably be more critical of him. I think that a film made from perhaps our perspective would be, I think that there would be more internal drama in the, and maybe it would be have to in the Curia and in among his advisors, and I think and more indication that maybe some people didn't have his best interests at heart in his inmost circle, in the Vatican. And I think that and perhaps it would even show some of his blind spots in prudence or in who the people he elevated or things like that. I'm not obviously qualified to speak to that, but I think that, it might have to be to in order to address those effectively, you might have to have a film of smaller scope, perhaps a film that just focused on the years of his papacy or something like that.
Right.
But, or I was thinking, this miniseries could have been even better if it was like a 5 or 6 hour series, I think.
Right.
But I think that. A figure who's there through his whole papacy is, I forget the actor who plays him, but Cardinal Jewitz. And, I'm certainly not I'm not going to sort of rashly judge the man, but there have been allegations of corruption, of taking bribes in order to kind of turn a blind eye to, misdeeds of various prelates. I think Maciel, maybe, for example. Yeah. But regardless of whether he's innocent or guilty, somebody in Pope John Paul II's circle was giving him bad information and telling him to elevate people that he shouldn't.
Right.
And we can see quite the list of people. Unfortunately, there's a long list of there's quite a list of prelates who were elevated by John Paul II, sometimes against the advice of others. So I have to think that there were also voices saying, don't listen to that person, or, just not even allowing certain information to get to him in the first place.
Right.
Particularly with Maciel. I think there's probably an argument to be made that Pope John Paul II sometimes promoted people who he knew had a different view than him on different things and kind of wanted a diversity of viewpoints. And, to what degree that ended up being prudent in certain respects, in certain cases, I should say, individual cases we could debate. But I think you would have to. There is a mention of sex abuse towards the very end of the film, with basically John Paul II just deploring it. Once this has come out, we can assume this is 2002 or 2001, something like that.
I think the subtitle said it was 2002.
2002, yeah, that makes sense. So,
but that was like a 12-second scene.
Yeah. So,
and I'm not saying that even that I needed it to become about that.
No.
I didn't need to really spend much time.
I'm not even criticizing this film. I'm just saying outdated is the right word.
Yeah, well, because the world that we're shown is a world where, the Vatican is working.
Yeah.
It's like,
and I think that, not only do circumstances today cause me to want to see, a little more indication of corruption in the Vatican, or some of the figures that may have misled John Paul II in certain areas or whatever. But also, sometimes I do have questions like, why did I wish I understood, why did he promote so-and-so? Why did he recommend so-and-so? What was he missing? What was his blind spot here? Always assuming that he was doing things out of love, but occasional, and I don't elevate my judgment over his, or I try not to, but that there are certainly occasions where history has simply shown it would been better if this person had not been elevated.
And that was kind of my experience of watching this film, is that at certain points I was filling in the blank almost, based on what we know now, however many, almost 20 years later.
Yeah.
Right. Especially, towards the end of the film, as we see his descent into Parkinson's, right? It's very affecting.
Yeah,
John Voight does a really great job of capturing the Pope John Paul II, who I knew, I mean, I grew up with him already in decline. And so this was the Pope that I came to know as a young man. And I immediately recognized it.
That's right.
But I also, was filling in the blank about the kind of the dark side to this, which is that people around him were taking advantage of him almost certainly. And that, if on the one hand there was this very heroic and noble witness to the dignity of life and to in all of its stages, even and especially at the end. On the other hand, there was this kind of dark political side to what was going on in the Vatican, what I think, we still see played out today.
And just as, I hope and expect that in our lifetime, we will come to a greater understanding of what was going on behind the scenes, to some extent at least, but in a way that hopefully, is not used to kind of disillusion people as to the sanctity of John Paul II.
Of course not.
I would hope that if a film were made today, it would make a serious attempt to kind of grapple with some of these things.
Yeah. Well, like one of the things that I love,
but still come across with the triumph that his life was, as this film does.
Yeah. One of the things that I loved the most was when we see a young Karol Wojtyla as Archbishop of Krakow, his ingenuity and his creativity in resisting the communists, and
ingenuity is the word I would use.
And
it does show that very effectively.
And I just was like, man, where are our shepherds today? I doubt that
maybe we can see Archbishop Cordileone in San Francisco taking some of these kinds of steps with restrictions on masses and kind of making some clever moves.
Right. But I want clever, courageous, and faithful shepherds like we see in Pope St. John Paul II in this film. And I guess, if I missed anything in this, it was the extent to which his rebuke of the communist authorities in his sort of pastoral care of his flock is also a challenge to other pastors in the church.
The other aspect in which it's outdated, I think, is its emphasis on his mission and teachings. There's a lot. This film was made in 2005. There's a lot of emphasis in the second half on his concern with, I'm the Pope that leads the church into the new millennium. That was a major concern of his, and specifically a world of peace and unity he wanted to see in the millennium. Now, I'm sure that this is taken from speeches he made or things that he wrote. This was a desire that he had. I don't know that, like, in his personal remarks with his friends, with his associates, he was always like kind of so optimistic about, this is what's going to happen. There's almost the sense in the film that he thinks that, like, the millennium is going to lead us into a world of peace and unity. I don't know to what extent that's accurate. Regardless, I think that obviously his role as a peacemaker would still be emphasized, but I think that some of the Not that it wouldn't show him as an optimistic man as a man of hope, a witness to hope, as George Weigel calls him, but that I think that other aspects of his teaching, which perhaps speak more to the challenges of our time,
right,
would be duly emphasized in a film made today. I think that there would be more of an acknowledgement that, well, we don't live in a world of peace and unity, and things have like arguably gotten worse in the church since his pontificate.
Right. There's almost a kind of naivete that we see in his character as portrayed in this film about where the world is headed. Yeah. And that's made all the more sort of, it's like accentuated all the more by just what has happened in the years since, right? But Pope St. John Paul II wasn't a naive man, right? And he was well acquainted with the evils of our day, evils that are characteristic of this modern moment, right? Yeah. So I don't think that that really does ring true. You know, if it's not counterbalanced by this sober awareness of the evil in the world. There's
another reason that it comes, especially the second half of the film comes off this way, and that's because the second half of the film is much more I don't know if myopic is the right word, but like it's much more stuck in John Paul II's like immediate circles in the Vatican in his travels. We don't like see the things he's responding to as much. We see them on TV screens. Sure. You know, he responds to 9/11, he makes a statement. Right. In the first half in Poland, he's directly dealing with things. He's in danger of arrest. All these things are happening. In the second, first of all, it's more of a spiritual conflict. It's harder to portray that. The stuff with solidarity is done really well, but then we just see him responding to various world events and traveling and things like that. And we don't see as much of the evils that he's responding to. We just see him hearing about something and looking concerned, or we see him driving through a crowd, being driven through a crowd of pro-abortion protesters, and kind of him like looking like sad, you know, right. But like we don't see as much of the evils that he's responding to. So it does feel like we're stuck in his own little world more, even though it's supposed to be showing him as a pope going out to people. Right. It's still very much like feels like a montage of like press moments. Yep. If that makes sense.
No, that's a really interesting point, because there is this kind of shift in you know, I don't know what to call it, if it's like a shift in tone, because it's a shift in space, right? It's very expansive at the beginning. Yeah. He's, you know, out on these nature excursions, he's in the theater, he's going through town, he's hiding from guards, and then he gets elected to the papacy, and now it's like he's in his office, you know.
And that maybe speaks to like some of the things we were talking about. He did travel the world, but he also had a lot, even with his travels, even with his desire to have a personal encounter with people, even with his informality, he still was having a lot filtered for him through this Vatican world. It's all being mediated
through his secretary, through the Secretary of State. You know, it's, I will arrange it for you. Okay. You know, and it is arranged. You know, interesting things to think about.
This film does a great job of conveying like the kind of the drama of his election as the Polish Pope and the response of the Polish people to that. The Polishness of John Paul II is something that I've been fascinated with for a few years. And whenever I read his writings or about his national identity or about his life, I like always like have this strong desire to like have been born in Poland. Sure. You know, because I don't have this same sense of national identity as American. It's something that I can work towards, perhaps. You know, God put me here for a reason. I'm not really complaining about that, but there is like a longing for something that I don't have, that I have to figure out how to incorporate into my life. Well, I think
that in Poland and in Polish culture in general, there is just a much stronger sense of national identity.
Yeah. And it's as a Catholic nation. It was born as a Catholic nation.
Right. So, and I think that especially among Polish artists and intellectuals and poets, there is this kind of Polish pride that he probably would have been, you know, very acquainted with and immersed in as an artist himself. Yeah. And so I appreciated that about the film, because I think that that is something that maybe a contemporary audience would want to distance itself from,
Mm-hmm.
you know, that if there were a film made about him today, it might not emphasize this sort of, let's call it the nationalistic side
Mm-hmm.
of St. John Paul II. But I so appreciated that that was present because this is a strong part, not just of who he is, but also of who he was as a pope, as a leader, you know, as a world figure.
And sometimes I will say, sometimes I like I have more than once gone on YouTube and just watched videos of the Polish people like reacting to news of his death, like the vigil, that not the one happening in St. Peter's Square, but that were happening in Poland when they were waiting for the announcement. You know, when he was on his deathbed, there's a video of a big soccer game being stopped.
Wow.
When they announce his death and the players and the crowd reacting, and it's very moving. It's tremendously moving just to think about how much this would have meant to this people.
Yeah, well, that was something that I found myself
pope.
reflecting on too, you know, watching this film is just how crazy it is to be the Pope, you know, and how the Pope has always been loved, I suppose, but Pope John Paul II was, I mean, he was loved. And I think that the two popes since then have had really big shoes to fill, you know,
and not in every way for the good, you know.
Right.
When you think about like I was thinking about when he says, you know, I need to travel around the world so that I can be a pastor, you know, and I was thinking, well, you know, I'm sure that was like his calling to do that, but
maybe not every
under
pope.
Normal circumstances, that's the calling of the Pope is not to be like directly a pastor to every diocese.
Yeah,
you know,
right.
He is the universal pastor, but like really the bishops.
Yeah,
but
you know, this was at a time too of I mean, the past century was a time of like the cult of personality and of these totalitarian states around a central figure, you know.
Yeah.
So we see, you know, the framed picture of Stalin up in the communist offices in Poland or whatever. And so like these huge personalities that are worshipped, right? The Pope, and specifically this Pope, is almost kind of like a counterpoint to that, right? Here's a real father who really loves. I mean, at the beginning, before in this opening sequence before his assassination, we see John Paul II ask one of the you know, kind of like Secret Service type figures around him about his daughter, and then he gives him a rosary and asks him to, you know, tell her that God loves her and I do too. And it's super moving. That line might sound cheesy, but it doesn't ring cheesy at all in the moment. And and it makes you want to cry, you know?
Yeah, those little moments in the film are very effective. They ring true, and I'm sure that they're based on real anecdotes.
Right, and so
you know?
so this is my point, is that, like, you know, if at the death of Kim Jong-il, you have public squares filled with people just like crying and mourning and in hysterics, you know, at the death of Pope John Paul II, you have a crowd in St. Peter's in silence and then clapping, you know? And I think that you know, this is something to reflect on, you know, not just about, you know, the gift that St. John Paul II was and that his papacy was to the church and to the world at that time, but it's something that I'm reflecting on watching this film, you know, seeing it played out. I think that this is one of the strengths of film, and I guess perhaps of saint films in particular. We'll talk more about this in a later episode when we tackle another one of these saint films. But to see a saint up close, to see these stories that you hear tell about, or that you see pictures of, to see them alive and incarnated and in movement. You know, this was something that we talked about too when we did that silent film on the life of Christ, how that this is a big shift in the way that we tell stories and in the way that we remember things, that we can see them in movement and alive on a screen in front of us. And you get to enter into the the event in a different way and reflect on it differently, you know. And that was something I was reflecting on watching this.
Something I think about with modern day biopics is like the portrayal of on film of people who we have film of
right
in real life,
right?
And like, how do you approach
kicked
that?
The camera again. I'm sorry. I set up the camera differently today, and so now I keep kicking the stand.
Okay. So I mean, how does an actor approach that? And like, does it render a film redundant in some way? You know, like, I don't think so. I think this works well. I think given that we have video of John Paul II, we have photos of him, and he was an actor himself. He was an incredibly charismatic personality, and I gotta have to say that I think that John Voight, like, for example, and I think both of the actors do a pretty good job of conveying his charisma.
Right.
You know, considering that we have video of this guy who is as charismatic as all get out already, and an actor could conceivably be intimidated by that.
Right.
You know?
Yeah. Yeah. Those two actors, it's clear that they showed up, right, to do this movie. There's a lot of great actors in the film, but John Voight and Cary Elwes in particular, you know, really, I think, arrived on set ready to make the definitive John Paul II biopic. And I don't know if that's what was accomplished. In fact, I'm pretty confident. I feel confident saying that that's not what was accomplished. But what's left is still a pretty darn good movie.
Yeah.
And perhaps something that can be an inspiration for a later stab.
Sure. Yeah. You know, the movie has its cheesy aspects. You know,
Sure.
Not all the acting is equally as good
Sure.
as those kind of some of the main characters.
There's some difficulties with the ADR. I think that stands for additional dialogue recording, where you go back in later and you record some of the dialogue over what was been shot. Sometimes, especially with some of the secondary characters, there's some out of sync stuff that throws you off.
But, you know, overall, it's very watchable.
Yeah. And again, you know, I so appreciate that it hits on these aspects of him, you know, his work as an intellectual, as a theologian, his artistic heart and background, and his Polish identity. I think that these are like three really, you know, significant points to hit in a story on his life. Mm-hmm. And I'm glad that they were there.
Yep.
Yeah.
Well, anything else we want to talk about?
Do you have like a favorite moment in the film? Anything that struck you? I don't know. I that's not usually something that we ask watching these films, but I feel like since this is a saint film, right? It's a film about, you know, not just someone who lived, but someone who is alive in the church today as one of her saints, and someone who we invoke in prayer, especially, you know, as patron of this show. You know, that these are opportunities to build a relationship with the saints. Any number of times that we watch a film about a saint. So yeah, was there anything in particular?
Well, I wouldn't say it's my favorite scene, but it's one of my favorite lines. Actually, is when he's a young man, when he's with his girlfriend at the time, and he's basically like breaking up with her, or she kind of like provokes his making a stand about it. You know, like she provokes him to clarify their relationship, and like that they're not going to get married. And I don't remember the exact line, but he basically says, like, with the times we're living in, my heart is already consumed.
Yeah.
And I was struck by that as like his reasoning that, like, you know, we have a vocation from God, but like it is also a response to our circumstances and the time we're living in. And that does impact. It's not just like sort of in the abstract called to be a priest. It's like that impacts, that relates to the needs of the time,
right?
And that he feels that he, like, a greater response is called from him than just to get married and have kids and live a normal life,
right? Yeah, that's That's great. I think for me, similarly, there's a moment when he's speaking with that solidarity leader, and whatever his name is,
Lech Walesa.
Yeah. He confides in John Paul II that he has this anger, and that there's that there's so much injustice perpetrated against them by this communist regime, and he says to him something like, yes, but with the grace of God, one day this will be over and we will have to find ways to forgive.
Yeah.
And he's exhorting him to mercy now, looking ahead to the future when it'll have to be a task then too. Right.
Yeah.
And so that was something that really struck me, and just made me think more about how, it's easy to talk about mercy and to talk about forgiveness, but it really is something that you have to find ways to accomplish. It's something kind of elusive. You have to discover it and look for it. And
well, especially on a social level.
Right.
I mean, it's much simpler to forgive someone in one's personal life.
Correct.
Although that sort of defining the terms of your relationship from then on may be complicated depending, but on a social level and even on a political level, that requires much more, find ways to forgive, and it involves that more than just the heart to forgive. It involves, it involves ingenuity, like we were talking about. It involves creativity. It involves a thinking outside the box,
right? Which I think, is precisely what's not being done right now, but we can leave it at that.
Right. Okay. Good positive note to end on. Okay. Well, thanks all for listening. And the next episode is going to be our discussion of the film 8.5 with Dappled Things editor Katie Karol. We've already got that recorded, but we wanted to do this bonus ep here for John Paul II's birthday. So thanks for listening. If you'd like to help us out, we're reaching the end of our Easter fundraising campaign right now.
Yep.
So if you want to donate anything up to $50,000, what I mean is the $50,000 mark, not if you want to donate. You can donate more. It's not limited to that. You can donate more than that. But we have a matching grant so that amount will be doubled if we make that. So that would be really helpful for Catholic culture to keep going. Not only this podcast, which is a pretty small part of the overall picture. Thanks for all listening. Please leave comments especially if you've watched any of the other films about John Paul II that you think we should check out,
or any of the other films on the Vatican list that we haven't checked out yet. Chariots of Fire, anybody? I'm willing to hear it. Let me know why I need to watch this movie.
Tell us what you'd like to see in the near future. We'll be doing the whole Vatican film list, of course, but we're open to influence as to what we tackle next.
Yes, we are just young, impressionable film critics.
That's right. Okay, well, St. John Paul II,
pray for us.